Hello everybody, this is Justin and Max Games, and Max is not here right now, so I'm going to do a review for the game New Haven. And there's been mixed reviews about this game, and I can totally tell why, but I've grown to really like it as I've played more. The issue that I find is my only big negative, and it's not a huge negative, are the fact that the components don't quite fit on the board perfectly. You have these squares that you're going to be trying to fill with these tiles, but if you notice, they're just a touch big. So every time you put something in, especially if it's in between, it pushes everything out. And the same thing goes for these little discs that are supposed to be your buildings that you're building. They're just a touch big, so they're always moving things around. I can't quite tell why that wasn't corrected before packing the game. Aside from the components, the game is actually really very interesting. The you know People say, "Oh, the theme is just pasted on." Why call this game New Haven? Why call it like colonial times, or set the thing in colonial times? I really think it has to do with the idea of waste not, want not. When you're putting down a tile to say, I'm going to generate a certain amount of resources, it's not only used by you during your turn to build as much as you can, basically maximizing how much you're going to be able to use, but then everyone else gets a chance to maximize whatever's remaining. And that's a really interesting mechanic. Whatever you haven't used, everyone else gets a chance to use. And that is the idea, waste not, want not. And the balance of the game, I find, is, well, if you're going to leave a little bit of stuff for somebody else to use, even though it's to their advantage because then they can build one of their buildings on their board, it also then, the way the rules go, is that if you can get all of your resources that you've generated on a turn removed or used, then you have more options for the next turn. You get more buildings with which you can broaden your options, basically. And I think that's a really interesting balance. There's two sides of the board. There's the A side and there's the B side, and then the rules give you different options on how to play. I definitely say just skip the A side. I know they say, well, your first game, you don't quite get it, and you should use the A side. To me, just start with the B side. So on the B side of the board, there are these empty areas. There's these cleared out spaces in which are put some random buildings that may be built at the beginning of the game. So if you're putting a tile down, let's say it's my turn and I cover this one, it gives me this, which I can then put behind my player board, which then gives me another option. Because you're not building here, this is where you're digging stuff up. This is what you're going to eventually build on your player board. You notice it's very shiny and glossy in here. I think that's actually an interesting aspect to the game. The other interesting aspect I find is the way that you can use the buildings that you build. Let's say you use 4 resources. You use 4 grain to build this building. Well, you definitely want to try to connect, colors together. That's the rule. You have to try to connect colors together. You can't just put a yellow here if there's already yellow somewhere else. But the issue is, well, maybe it is to my benefit to actually flip it. I've already used the 4 resources, and if I can put it down on a 4, then I can keep it face up, which will give me double points if I can score the whole column or the whole row at the end of the game. However, it might be to my benefit to flip it, even though I still have this. Now if I flip it, I can put it anywhere I want, as long as it's still connected to a color, because maybe this will allow me to, finish an entire row. And the way the points work at the end is that the various rows attract these colonists. So these are the points. So if I can finish this entire row, I will get 6 colonists or 6 points. However, if all of the tiles are flipped up, so if all of their numbers are facing, meaning that they're all matching numbers, then you would get double, which is actually really difficult to do, especially these high numbers. It means you'd have to generate, 30 of the same, 30 of a resource or 30 of different resources that you could build this way. It creates a really interesting puzzle that goes along in the game. This is an example of a finished board. I'll show it right side up. In this case, this row does not score because there's no item here. However, this column does score, and it will score me 3 points because of these three guys in here. I was able to build them, but they're not the right number, and therefore I don't double the points. If I had all of these faced up, regardless of color, then instead of the 3, you would have gotten 6. So in this case, almost every area that I built, I had to flip something up. But that's the real gist of the game, because if you have something flipped to the non-number side, you still can score a row or a column, which is better than scoring nothing at all. So use your resources, allow other people to use your resources in order for you to gain more options. I don't know, I originally gave this game, I was sort of, well, it's a 6 or a 7, but now I'm hedging actually more towards 8. The more thoughtful I am about the game, and the more thoughtful I realize the design was. The only thing that keeps it away from being anything more than that, and maybe even not quite an 8, maybe a 7.5 for me, is the component issue. They're really nice pieces. The art is cool, the numbers are cool, the board is cool, the theme is nice, the boards have the names of various areas. This one says Stratford and Guildford and other places and Fairfield. The only thing is that they don't quite fit, and that seems really strange to me that that wasn't corrected before issuing them, especially knowing the publisher R&R Games, which has made so many wonderful games that we have. That just seems like an anomaly. But I don't want to overstate that because it's not a huge deal. You're just kind of moving things around just a little bit. Your board just seems a little bit too crowded on where you're gaining resources. The fields also seem just a little bit crowded. The shield behind which you're hiding all of your stuff is cool. Gives you the usual information behind that no one ever uses once they know the game. They're not really using this. I don't even know why designers even put this behind there anymore. And one other aspect of the game is don't forget to use your shipment tile. Your shipment tile is the one that's face down in the game until you play it at the end of your turn, because this is a real nice way of, well, there's no wood on the board or whatever, and you could say, you know what, I'm calling this 4 wood. You connect it to a couple of others, and all of a sudden now you've generated enough lumber to build something that you need. At the end of the turn, from left to right, it flips and just becomes a normal tile on the board for other people to use. Plus, since it's all of one kind, that means that all of the other resources aren't being used that turn, and therefore you have a much better chance of getting 3 or even 4 options, new buildings that you may build at the end of the game. The more options, the more circles you have, the more of these discs you have behind your board at the end of your turn, the more options that you have. The high numbers, if you can keep them face up, well, now you can score double points at the end of the game. That's a lot to be able to try to generate. Or you might want to go for some low numbers, 3s and 2s and 1s, and be okay about flipping them just so that you could generate. There's so much to think about in the game. I know it's the thoughtfulness rating is, or the complexity rating on Board Game Geek is not super high. I think it's under 2. But, you know, there is a lot to think about. In a 2-player game, we played 2 games in about an hour. We haven't played 3 or 4. I've seen that people say that 4 takes a bit long because you're thinking so much, which one do I use and which way do I rotate it. And 3-player I think would work fine, of course, as well. But 2-player that I've played with my wife now a number of times. The first time I was kind of men's on the game, and I think she was too. We found it a little bit weird. But there's a lot going on. I definitely would recommend it. And that's my review of New Haven.